Hello everybody and welcome to this month's Contract Administration Practice Crew. Today we continue in our multiple part series on counting down the top 10 best practices for construction contract administration. So with that, Jim and Douglas, I'll hand it over to you to get started with today's session.
All right, thank you, Matthew. Welcome everybody to best practice number 8 in a series of the top 10 best practices for construction contract administration. I wanted to just for a second reiterate what Matthew said about raising your hand or typing in the chat box. We would love to stop the conversation and have your input to be able to respond to questions or items of interest, anything that you want to add to the discussion. It makes it much more rich to do that. So I'll pause and be quiet for a second. Doug?
Welcome, everyone. We're glad you could come back and join us again this month as we continue on with the top 10 practices. And with that, Jim, I guess we're good to go.
Okay, Matthew, let's go to the first slide. We'll go through these first 2 or 3 pretty quickly. So I'd like to give credit to Mr. Letterman, whatever he's doing these days, I don't know, but he set us on this path of top 10 best practices. So the next slide, Matthew, what we've talked about already is best practice number 10, which is to have fun. And be sure that you plan for that within your organization. Set that time aside. It's why most of us got in this profession, architecture, engineering, construction, because it was fun. It was something we were passionate about, and it's something that you need to organize around and plan for. If you don't set the time aside for it, it's a good chance it's not going to happen. And then after that, we did best practice number 9, which is to remember your pants pocket. You buy a new pair of pants and you stick your hand in the pocket, and there is the tag from inspector number 6, and it just lets you know that they have been through a quality control, quality assurance process. And boy, if they can do it for a single pair of pants, shouldn't we be doing that for multi-million-dollar projects? Absolutely, we should, and it's the best spent marketing money, we believe anyway, that you can spend, because with fewer problems, fewer coordination issues, fewer change orders, you certainly should be creating a happy client who will be coming back to you for further services. So those were the first 2. And what we're going to go to is best practice number 8, Matthew, the next slide, which is about teamwork and creating winners. And I just want to set this up and then pause for a second to give Doug an opportunity. But this is where we talk about maximizing your strengths and minimizing your weaknesses. You'll see a lot of references to sports here. It's an easy way to make a point, but it's certainly about project synergy. Doug, anything you want to add to that before we jump in?
Well, a lot of people may not think of a construction project as a team. They might think of the team as just being the construction team and not include the players like the designers, and they might picture that as a separate team. They've got a design team, they got a construction team, they got an owner team. But we would encourage that you look at all of those teams together as one big team that is for the project. It's a group of people linked in a common purpose of getting a successful building built for the purpose that the building was designed for. And don't think in the pigeonholes of I'm on the design team and I'm not on the construction team. Just get that broader picture and look at it as a total construction team, as a total project team for the purpose of a successful project. Matthew, can we go to the next slide?
So in the next look that we'll take here, we'll talk about some phases of construction. And of course, one of the, if you'll recall, let me go back and say, if you'll recall, that Doug and I spend a lot of time focused on the design, bid, build kind of process, a delivery method. And so we try to focus our comments and conversation around that. Certainly there are many other delivery methods, and some of these things that we talk about will be slightly different in instances when there is a different delivery method used. But if we talk about in that design, bid, build delivery system, then certainly there are, for example, pre-bid conferences where you have an opportunity to take a look at the community that is interested in your project. It's a great time to have what may be seen as tryouts for your team. It's certainly a group of potential teammates that are showing up to show their interest in the project. So most of the time we see that those kind of gatherings are mandatory in the process of bidding on a project. And when they are, Doug and I both see this as an opportunity for you to do some research on the firms that are interested. You'll certainly be able to tell those that have looked at the contract documents. They'll have pointed questions about the various pieces and parts of your project. So in answering those questions, pay attention to the group that is doing their best to understand the project. And of course, in the public bidding market, you can't pick and choose, but you certainly do know when you are in line to team up with a successful team. And I'll just hit on these next two and then be quiet for Doug here a minute. But the next opportunity after those bids is the pre-construction conference. Again, you're a part of the team, as Doug said. This is not a dictatorship, so it's an opportunity for you to start to lay the groundwork for how the team works. Every good coach understands how to get the best out of their players, and this is an opportunity for you to look at that group in the same fashion. And then as you move into the construction phase, the particular players start to get their assignments. The various team members start to come together. You have the organization that they are with, but you're starting to see now the individuals that are going to be on the field. And so this, again, is another opportunity for you in that role as a coach to start to pull that group together. Doug?
I would add on that at the pre-bid conference, encourage subcontractors and suppliers to attend those as well. It will help in a competitive bid process. It will help in identifying some of the prime contractors that will be bidding and getting them familiar with possibly some subcontractors that they may not be familiar with, ever worked with before. And I think it will help increase the competitive bidding so that when you open bids on bid day that you're looking at some decent numbers. So including not just the general contractor or the major subcontractors, the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing. Invite the subcontractors, get the painting guys, get the drywall guys, get some of the suppliers. If you can, encourage them to come and ask questions and network with each other and help in promoting that kind of teamwork atmosphere. Matthew, let's go to the next slide.
Any questions so far, Matthew?
We do have one question here. It came in from Eric. Says, do you think that third-party negotiated work in developer-contractor scenarios are worth talking about in an entirely different session, or will we talk about them in this one?
Well, I'll say that we have not specifically spoken about or made note of them in the presentation today, but is certainly an opportunity right now for us to make some comments. And I would just say, to start, my experience has been in the negotiated arena. This team aspect really starts a lot sooner than in the design, bid, build, where that team and this conversation that we're having begins potentially at the very first meeting, depending on who is selecting the designer and the contractor and how that contract is drawn up, whether the owner is using you to be a part of that selection or whether you're brought in to be interviewed by the contractor. I don't know, Doug, do you want to add something to that?
I would agree with that. Typically with the design, bid, build scenario, other than previous relationships, that team building, I think, can start at the pre-bid conference. But if you're doing like a negotiated situation, Jim, as you were describing, then that starts a lot sooner. If you're doing a design build, again, it's going to start sooner, probably sooner than if it was a negotiated bid situation. So depending on the delivery method, it influences when the team is formed and when the teammates come together. But I think in all of the scenarios, all of the delivery methods, it's still a team concept of coming together to work to complete a successful project.
And Doug and I talk about this a lot over the various programs that we participated in, but that the opportunity for, in a negotiated project, the opportunity for everyone to learn from one another, to take the opportunity to reach into that field experience that the construction community has and let that inform what you do with your documents moving forward, is something not to be missed. We both have learned a great deal of what we know from the folks that we have partnered with in the field, and you actually have that opportunity to have an impact on your quality control and assurance even earlier in a negotiated project. And sometimes it gets to be a competition of trying to save the design versus having all the decisions be based on cost. But I think if you can find a happy medium to work together there's some real opportunities. Doug and I also talk a lot about communication as being at the core of what we do, and it's no different in building your team. I won't go into a long story about this image here on the screen, except to say that one of your opportunities in putting this team together is to understand who your starters are. This gentleman, my good friend, he was a starter. He's a guy, and those are the people that are on the site. As Doug said, the subcontractors that have their hands on the materials. So we often speak about the rules and regulations of a project or the officiating of the game with a group of people who are going to disappear from the trailer never to be seen again. And we don't spend time with people like Jose who are actually the ones in the field. So taking the opportunity to be sure that those that are on the site, that are working, understand what the specifications say and understand how to work inside a LEED certified building and not burn rolls of asphalt for heat, to try to heat up materials so that the material itself is meeting a temperature requirement versus the temperature meeting a temperature requirement. It's really important to set that stage at perhaps pre-installation conference. Maybe it's not the pre-bid, but it certainly could be the pre-construction. But at a last effort at a pre-installation conference, being sure that your team understands the rule book is really critical. Doug?
Jim, I don't really have anything to add to that. just to emphasize what you said, the rule book is critical, and I often say, since we are as the architects and engineers, since we are the authors of the book, then we need to make sure that the book is the way we want it to be, the way we're going to enforce it, and edit it to make sure that it doesn't have superfluous items in there, and put in what you're going to enforce. If you're not going to enforce it, don't put it in there, so that the expectations are clear up front.
Absolutely. Matthew, any other questions right now?
No, there's just a secondary comment from Eric as you guys were talking about his question, indicating except when pricing and GMP happens at 80%. I'm not sure if you want to talk about that. But we actually did have a comment just came in here from Brian. He said, how can you talk to Jose in the field when you don't have any contractual relationship with Jose? How do you manage the relationships with Jose or Jose's boss?
Well, that's a great question, and what I have done in the past, after accidents like the one you see in this image here occur, is to ask for more pre-installation conferences and to ask the general contractor to assure me that the individuals in the field are the ones that attend that conference. Now, you raise an excellent point, which is that I have no real end control over that. But what I've done is ask the contractor to have that group on the site. And let's talk about the exposure of roof insulation to UV light and how we're going to not let that happen and how we're going to sequence. You know, we're talking about means and methods for the contractor, but I'm speaking about enforcement of the project specifications and being sure that the community that is going to be installing that work is actually hearing that message. And what I've found is that rather than being resistant to that, the contractors have said, oh man, that's great, because you can hammer on them and be the bad guy, and I don't have to. And so they've often been very supportive of bringing the actual workers into the field to these pre-installation conferences. Again, for example, when we're doing mock-ups, I say, I understand who's going to come out here and do this is the A-team, and if the A-team is going to do the work, that's great. But if they're not, let's have the guys that are going to be on the site. And we're going to communicate, we're going to know who one another are, and I'll be able to follow up on that. Well, let's jump to, go ahead, Bill.
And as far as talking to Jose or anyone else that's out there on a job site, I encourage it. I encourage people to talk to, don't just have a relationship with these project superintendent. Talk to the people that are out there doing the work. You can learn a tremendous amount from watching, observing, talking to the craftsmen, the tradesmen, the people that are out there actually doing the work. I think it'll make you a better designer. I think you can learn about how materials go together and sequencing, and use those lessons learned when you are developing your documents. And it's not that you are giving direction. I would not advise you to give direction to those guys, but to have a conversation with them, to understand what they're thinking, how they're doing things, I think is a tremendous value. So I would encourage you to talk to the guys that are out working on the project site, but you do need to be careful about giving them direction. If there's issues that come up, if he's in an unsafe condition, you know, it's all right to go up and tell him, and I've done it before. You got a guy in a trench and it's 6 feet deep and there's no shoring and it's not cut back on a 45-degree angle, and there's the potential that the trench can cave in on them. I would expect that you would tell them you need to get out of there and follow up with the superintendent. So whether it's a safety item or just he's doing something and you haven't seen it done that way before, go up and ask him, why are you installing it this way? What's the point of doing it that way? You can learn a lot.
That's true. Matthew, let's go to the next slide. Even if there are some questions, we'll get those. One of the things that we talk about often is also nurturing the team. This is not a shouting match that is something that we have to do all the time, but there are opportunities for things like having coffee and donuts at the meeting and showing up with those, or giving out atta-girls, to the folks that are at the meeting in front of their peers and in front of your client, the owner, to say, gosh, these folks went above and beyond, and I just want to take a minute to say thank you for whatever it was that occurred. I don't know, it's so often that we get immediately dug into adversarial positions, and perhaps we don't stop enough and think. We'll talk in a few minutes about being the disciplinarian, and that's important, but often there's an opportunity to nurture. And so let's go to the next slide, Matthew, and interrupt us anytime with questions. So,
all right, Jim. Well, Jim, I'm going to pop in here. With regards to the conversation we had on the last slide, there was a comment that came in here that was some concern, I think, that probably you'll want to address or at least talk about, indicating that conversations with subcontractors need to be very limited. We discourage that activity because it always led to questions, and you take on a tremendous risk when you talk directly to subs, especially on safety issues. The exception being the holy cow or where imminent danger exists moment.
Well, the imminent danger was the example I gave of the guy in the trench, and you certainly should address that. Talking to subcontractors and building those relationships, I don't think there's a problem with doing that. If you're trying to step into the role of the GC and you're giving him instructions on how he needs to be doing his job, that you don't need to do. But talking to him to learn how he does things, why he's doing it the way he's doing it, I think that's totally different.
That's right. I would say that our comments are meant in the format of relationship building rather than directing. As coaches, there's definitely direction happening there. And I would see those moments within our relationships with the construction community being provision of expertise outlined in our documents, explaining the ins and outs of what we are seeing as a quality of construction or as an application of the general conditions. I agree, you have to be very careful when you're having that kind of a conversation in the field, and those directives, as Doug is saying, those actionable items that we need to communicate are best done with the general contractor, and the points of contact that have been established in the pre-construction conference or in your agreements with the parties that are on site. We're talking about relationship building and not necessarily directing when we're talking about spending time with the subcontractor community. Doug, is there any clarification?
No, I don't have a further follow-up. I think that covers it. It's as you said, if you are dealing with a contractual issue, if there's a matter that needs to be addressed, you need to follow the proper lines of communications. And Jim, you and I are big proponents of making sure that you follow the proper lines of communication. But that does not mean, in my opinion, that you can't have a casual conversation with the subcontractor about the work he's doing, about what he did over the weekend, what he's going to do for his vacation, and building those friendships and relationships on the construction site.
And you know, we're talking about this slide as we answer those questions. And Matthew, please keep sharing with us more. You know, this is a team effort. There's no individual that accomplishes any of this that we do for a profession. Even for a sole practitioner who designs and administrates from start to finish on a project has to have that construction team along with them for a successful project. And our interest is to just remind everyone of that team concept from start to finish, because we often isolate ourselves in the process of getting this done. So, Matthew, let's look at the next slide and talk about what some of those benefits are to this team approach. And jump in any time that there are questions or hands raised. You know, there certainly are better communications on a project, which in our estimation can lead to increased productivity. If we're providing information to the construction community in a more timely basis, certainly they are able to implement that work on a more timely scenario and schedule. It can, on projects that are structured as such, reduce the project costs. If there are opportunities to save time, and it's a time and material type project that we're working on, we perhaps took input from the construction community at points along the way and have come up with a different design which affords a better sequence. I'll give you a personal example. I was working on a school that the designer had decided would start out at the elevation of the ground with a precast unit that was going to take a great deal of time to get to the site. And so that same designer listened to the pre-bid comments, went back, took a look at the design and restructured that in another way to obtain the same effect, but do it with a different material. And so it saved over 45 days in the schedule of the project and waiting to get the material on the site. So there were changes in the project schedule that made the project finish earlier, which saved the owner money and made them very happy, and still achieved what the owner was interested in seeing at the beginning, with sort of a foundation cornerstone effect on their project. And when all those things are running smoothly and relationships are good, there certainly is improved morale on the project. Doug and I have often talked about a momentum that a project gets, that once things are clicking, it's just a joy to be associated with a project like that. And in the end, all of those things add up to fewer delays and potentially fewer claims that have to be dealt with by you or by the owner when a project operates that way. Doug, I'll hush for a minute.
Jim, I'm good. Matthew, let's go to the next slide, and after the next slide, we'll stop and see if we've got any comments or questions. Okay.
So, converse to that, then, what are some obstacles in putting together a team like this? Perhaps there are some adversarial relationships. They could be pre-existing. Doug and I often talk about how small the community is that we work in because we see contractors, we see designers, we see owners over and over in the sequence and process of designing and building. Of course, another obstacle are inaccurate documents, something that often rests solely on our designer shoulders, where we either didn't allow sufficient time for production or we didn't allow sufficient time for coordination, or perhaps we didn't have the right personnel on the job to begin with, and so we've got some inaccuracies that interrupt the team approach. And often we have schedules with the owners. We like to be yes people and not say why that's completely unreasonable. Doug and I have done a lot of K-12 educational work, and there's a pretty standard schedule of when they want that building finished so they can start a school year. And often it is far too late when the construction community is selected to actually be able to get that done in a proper fashion. But we don't say no too often. Also, unplanned changes, unforeseen conditions that may have occurred, whether it's something that nobody could have anticipated under the ground, or whether it's something that may have occurred because of a merger or acquisition within your client's organization. You know, we've got to reduce the size or increase the size. Some of those things are obstacles. And then there can be other delays, like within products themselves or within labor. We are typically not a unionized state here in North Carolina, so most of the work is not union labor, but certainly in areas where that is an impact, that could lead to labor disputes. And then just poor communications and not, as Doug said, we create the documents and not holding up our end and getting information passed back to the construction team, or having ineffective management within our firm, within the client's office, and within the construction firm as well, where they're just not the experience, or perhaps everyone's overworked and has too much on their plate. We are seeing more and more of that right now as the economy comes back. There was a time when people had plenty of time to respond to questions on the job or to spend time at the project managing. So these are just a few of the obstacles that we have experienced to creating that team.
Matthew, let's go to the next, excuse me, Jim. Let's go to the next slide and check to see if we've got any questions or comments.
Yeah, we had one question came in here from Christina. She was wondering, so a GC team may include project engineers with less than 5 years of experience who manage RFI modifications, substitutions as centralized in the project website database. The database may include back-end functions and fields with the potential to link communications with cost. Do you have any recommendations for qualifications and ownership of the project website databases beyond the language provided in Division 01?
Let me take a stab at that. I would prefer, and I've recently changed roles and I'm working for an owner as an owner's rep now. I would prefer that the control of any web-based management software rests with the designer. I think as a profession, we kind of have tried to protect ourselves liability-wise and have let contractors increase their involvement and role and interaction with the owner. But that record of the project, we're charged with administering the contract, the construction contract. And a part of that is that management of those documents. And that's why I'm saying I would prefer to see that rest with the architect as opposed with the contractor. And I say that not only as an architect, but now also as seeing my role as this owner's rep, is that that's what the architecture profession is charged with doing. That is their responsibility. That's where I would expect for that to be kept. I don't have an issue with contractors keeping their own record, and if they want to do it with a web-based program, that's fine as well. But if I'm the architect, I'm going to want to have my database that I'm using that's going to be the project record, and if I'm the owner, I'm going to want my architect to have that as well. Jim, you have anything to comment on with that?
No, I don't. I think you covered that. Well, I lied. Maybe I do. I guess there's some owner scenarios where the owners control that, but I agree with what you said 100%.
Anything else, Matthew, before we move on?
Christina says thank you on her end, so that would be it at this point.
Okay. So I'm going to jump in with this slide. Know your role. You're on the team. The team is made up of several team members. It's important that you know your role, but it's also just as important, if not more important, that you know the role and appreciate the role of the other members of the team. This slide here is showing a picture of Dennis Rodman with his stat line, 0 points, 20 rebounds, and on that Chicago Bulls team, that was his role, to play defense and to rebound. And in the background, you see Michael Jordan in the image, and his role was to score. And as a part of that team, they knew their roles, they appreciated what each other's role was, and it led them to 3 championships. And I'm saying 3, I know Chicago won more than that. It was 3 with the 2 of them on the team together. So it's a matter of knowing your role and appreciating the role of the other team members. I've heard several coaches, and again, we're talking sports analogies here, that emphasize, know your role, do your job well. If everybody on the team is doing their job to the best of their ability, then that increases the possibility for success. So if my role on the job as the architect, I'm doing that role to the best of my ability. And I've come to learn to appreciate, again, in my role here at Cape Fear on the owner side, the role of the guy that is cleaning and mopping the floor. If he's doing his job well, then I don't have to worry about my patients or clients coming in and having a dirty floor and getting a bad impression of my facility, or in the case of healthcare, risking infection. So his job is just as important as the job of the guy that designed the facility. So it's just an appreciation of the talents and abilities that the members of the team have as a whole. Jim?
That's right. No, man, that's well said. I love that image and I love that example because it's just so precise. Let's go to the next slide, Matthew, and we'll go through this slide quickly. But as we talk about, there's momentum and there's a mood. It's something that we need to be aware of and stay on top of. There are players that are going to come and go off of this team as we change from trade to trade. There'll be some re-education that we have to do because they weren't there in the early phases. And that communication, sharing of our expectations and what the team needs is important for us to stay on top of. So let's look at the next slide. When here's the ultimate disciplinarian as a coach. And, you know, there are times when we have to be motivational in the way that we deal with something on the job site, then we need to do that. And we need to make things right, and we need to get things straightened out. But here's a line that your liability insurance carriers won't like, but Doug and I have lived a lot of our career this way. When you need to take the blame for something, do it. And when you need to be the fall guy or the fall lady, do it. You know, I cannot tell you how many trailers I have been in my 36 years in the field where I have heard a superintendent or a project manager or a foreman say, that's the first time I've ever heard an architect, or that's the first time I've ever heard an engineer take the blame for something that they did. I am used to them always trying to get out of that, and I will never forget today for the rest of my career. And what we both have seen happen is that when you do say, gosh, I should have done that better, the people that you're working with, your teammates, usually have an answer for you and how to get out of that situation. They usually have the ability to share with you what to do and a direction that will get you back on top. So be sure that you do everything you can to take that opportunity without exposing yourself to unnecessary risk. As I said, the liability insurance carriers won't like this line, but Doug and I have seen it happen many times. And then lastly, when you need to sit on the sideline and cheer for the other people on the team and give them their moment in the spotlight to be the hero, then be sure that you're able to do that. Show the respect of the craft, whatever that may be, and take the time to be sure that they get the accolades for what they've done to make the team be successful. Doug, any other items?
Jim, that was well said. I agree with everything that you said there, all the points that you made, and I would just add that as far as sitting on the sideline and cheering, I would say look for those opportunities to where you can be a champion for one of your other teammates. I'm in a situation now where we're doing a project that's on an extremely short schedule, and the plumbing fixtures that were specified have a long lead time and are pushing us past our completion date. The contractor has proposed a substitute fixture that he can get sooner. It's going to involve some more rough-in work, but it's going to enable us to meet the schedule. And he is definitely going to get applauded and cheered for taking the initiative and investigating and finding us that alternative fixture is going to help us get back on schedule. So you need to look for those opportunities, and as Jim said, bolster up the teammates. Help them to do their job as you're doing yours.
Matthew, let's go to the next slide. Any comments or questions so far?
No, at this point we're pretty quiet still.
Cool. So this teamwork, this collaborative effort for us and for the construction community is founded in first a complete and thorough understanding of the documents. And it's really critically important that all players understand the game plan. And we find often that in the construction phase, as a project moves from the bidding department to the construction department, that it goes through many different hands, and that understanding of the documents is not as thorough as it should be. And also the understanding of how to administer construction particularly by the project manager or project engineer or superintendent, and by the owner, and by us, but the administering of the delivery method that has been chosen is critical to be on top of and to have experience in. We talk about how different delivery methods affect the way projects come together, and we rarely talk about the experience of the individual that's doing it. How do you ever learn to do a design build if first you don't do one? Well, Doug and I talk about all the time teaming up on a project the first time you try something like that to learn and understand it from a mentor rather than trying to learn it on your own. And then, as Doug has already said, filling the appropriate roles is paramount for us to do. Know our role and do it well. And then the next slide, Matthew. So when we have this team, as we've talked about, there will be moments where there are superstars, and there will be moments where those same players will remain unseen and off the field. I love looking at these NFL receivers and how they have the presence of mind to, in the instant that a ball touches their hands, their feet, it seems to me their toes, no matter how high off the ground they may be to have caught that ball, somehow get on the ground inside the field of play. And it just, there are example after example after example. This is from Super Bowl 43, this image in Santonio Holmes. But, this is now a very old image. But why I share it and why it's a part of this conversation to me is that, that's only half the picture. Somebody put that ball in exactly that right spot for exactly this play to have occurred in exactly this moment. And Santonio didn't do that by himself. While it may be the winning play and the winning catch, it's not on him. It's on a series of people that allowed the pass to happen. It's on a series of people that laid the play out to be run the way it was. It's on a series of people who figured out how to get a ball in that location, and on a person who put it there. So it's all a large group of individuals focused on a common goal. And today, in the construction industry, I hesitate to use the word brokerage, but for some of you that may be old enough, for Doug and I, construction, when we got into this field, was a bit of a different place. And there were individuals that were employees of construction companies who were controlled by the people there. So when schedules were set and promises were made for dates to be met, there was some control over where people showed up and when. In today's market, it's far from that. There's very little work self-performed in the construction community, and it's a combination of subs and sub-subs and sub-sub-subs. So keeping in mind that that is the kind of team and organization that you're trying to muster into a group effort is important in how we set up our project activities. Doug, what do you think?
Jim, I agree again, obviously. And the point that you're making about that it's not just Santonio Holmes that made this play possible, I think, is a good one. And you got to look at the linemen that protected the quarterback that threw the pass, the offensive coordinator that called the right play at the right time. I mean, there's so many things that go into it, and even going past the offense, you look at the defense. If the defense hadn't done their job, then they wouldn't have been in a position to win the game on the last play. They'd be down by more points. So, again, it's that total team concept, doing your piece of it well, lifting up the other members of the team so that they can do their job well, not getting down on them when they make a mistake. Same thing with construction. If the contractor has made a mistake, you don't want to, that's not the time to jump on him and beat him down. That's the time to lift him up, encourage him, help him to fix the problem and do better going forward. So it's the same, we're using a sports analogy, it really is the same or very similar as with sports. When someone's made a mistake, that's not the time, whether it's on a sports field or whether it's on a project construction site. That's not the time to beat them up and try to make yourself look better by putting them down. You got to keep in mind the goal is a successful project for your owner, and that should be what's in your mind at all times, and making sure that you're taking steps and actions to see that that happens. Matthew, do we have anything from the group?
There was just a few questions about whether or not the slides would be available. So I just left a note to everybody in the comment section. I just uploaded a PDF of today's slides, and they will be on the handout section of the GoToWebinar panel on your screen right now, so feel free to download those as we go.
That's excellent. Well, Matthew, if you don't have any questions, or if anybody's got their hand raised, certainly please shout out and ask us. Our next gathering will be March the 22nd in best practice number 7, which is hold costs in check. And we certainly hope to see you back with us then, where we talk about another one of the top 10 best practices. Matthew, any other hands raised or questions before we all go?
No, at this point we have a couple people just saying thanks. But other than that, looks like we have gotten through the slides and the questions in a few minutes early today. So I'll let you guys close out with anything else you want. I'll go to the last slide and then we can wrap up.
Yeah, I will just say thank you very much for being here and turn it over to Doug.
I would just reiterate that we thank you for being here. Our email addresses are on the screen now. If you've got questions, comments, suggestions for future presentations, please feel free to email either Jim or myself, and we will be happy to. We have in the past gotten questions from participants that were directly related or not indirectly related to some of the presentations we've done, and we're happy to hear from everyone. So please email us.
All right. Well, with that then, thank you, everybody. I appreciate your time and efforts. Again, today's session is recorded and will be posted to the YouTube channel at youtube.com/CSIConstruction. I'll look for that later today or tomorrow. And additionally, as I said, we look forward to seeing you next month in March as we do number 7 in our countdown of the top 10 list. Thanks, everybody.